Hi, hello, welcome to my talk. My name is Susanna and I'm an assistant professor of psychology at the University of Warwick. And today I'm going to present to you some of my research on children's event memory and how iconic gestures can facilitate event memory in this age group. My talk is part of the Symposium on the role of gestures in facilitating language acquisition and cognitive development. And I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this great symposium. I'm very excited to hear everyone's talks. I will also be active on Twitter for the duration of the conference, so feel free to interact with me there or during the discussion. Although my study is about event memory, it also has clear links to the verb learning literature because we tackle the problem of 3-year-old children struggling to identify actions in complex events, where actions are often the referent of novel verbs. And I would like to make this link clear early on to help tie in my presentation with the rest of the symposium. Now, this problem or this struggle likely happens because children focus on the more stable components of an event, such as the person who performs the action or the object acted upon, rather than the transient action component, where an action is something that can only be seen momentarily and it comes and goes. And we know children struggle with this encoding because we can tell from their performance in recognition memory tasks and verb generalization tasks. A good example of children's recognition memory can be seen in Imai, Haru, and Okada's study from 2005. This was originally a verb learning study, but actually they show in an experiment what children remember in terms of the different aspects of an event. And they show that children have stronger memory for objects than for actions. And the way they tested this was as follows. So if you look at the section of my slide on object memory, I have a still frame here of a video clip that children would typically see. And here there was a rugby-shaped ball that was rolled between the two hands of an experimenter. And later children were tested on their memory of this object in a 2 alternative forced choice task, where they had to select one video out of 2, where one video was exactly the same as before, so showing the same object in action, but the distractive video was a different object that they hadn't seen before, on which the same action was performed. So if children remember the object, then they should go for the event here that shows the same object. Similarly, in this study, children's action memory was tested with a training event, followed by a test of 2 videos of the same object on which different actions were performed. So if children remembered the action from the training event, they should go for the same action event here in the test as well. So from the memory study, we know that children focus more on objects than on actions. And here in the verb generalization study by Imai, Kita, Naguma, and Okada from 2008, we can observe a similar pattern. 3-year-old children perform a chance when they ask to generalize a verb to a novel event in which the action is kept the same, but the actor changed. So here on the right-hand side, you see the training event where a rabbit performs a certain movement. This movement is labeled with a novel verb, and in the test, children are asked to extend this verb to one of these 2 events. So on the left-hand side, there is a novel actor performing the same movement, and on the right-hand side, there is the rabbit, the same actor, performing a different movement. And children don't really overwhelmingly pick either option. They actually perform a chance. And Imai and colleagues suggest that this is because children map a novel verb to the combination of an actor and an action. And this is problematic because this stops them or prevents them from generalizing a verb to a new situation. So now that I've laid out the problem and how we know what children seem to be doing, here's the solution that we propose in this study. So our idea was to introduce iconic gestures that people naturally produce when speaking to help children see the actions as separate components in complex events. So what are iconic gestures? Well, here I use the definition by David McNeil, who says that iconic gestures represent actions or attributes associated with people, animals, or objects in the world. And importantly, they depict a relationship between two entities in shape and motion to illustrate what is said. So here I have an example of an iconic gesture that maps onto the movement of the man on the right. So what I would like you to pay attention to is the shape and the motion of my hands when I gesture, and the shape and the motion of the legs of the man on the right. So these are the type of stimuli that I generally use in my experiments. And these manners of locomotion and the iconic gestures are part of the GRACE stimuli database, which is an openly available resource for researchers to use. And norming experiments showing how well the iconic gestures match or mismatch certain movements have been published in the Behavior Research Methods journal. So if you're interested in these stimuli, I just want to point out that these are openly available online. And here is another example of the type of movements that were included in the database. And there are more than 26 different movements. So just to use this as a segue into the study design, these are exactly the type of videos that the 3-year-old children in my study viewed, and we then tested what they remembered of the different aspects of the video. So here, our research question for the study was whether children encode and remember action events differently when their attention is guided by iconic gestures. And we had 2 types of trials. And if you think back to the beginning of my presentation, where I showed the object and actor memory trials from Imai and colleagues from 2005, we basically used a very similar paradigm. But here, because we are dealing with manners of movement, we had to make some changes. So I'll walk you through the actor memory trials first. So children saw 12 training events, all consecutively. And in these training events, they saw an actor perform an unusual movement, and they heard some neutral language such as, "Wow, look at what she's doing," and "she's doing it again." So after they watched all the videos, for half of them, they were tested on their actor memory. And this worked as follows. So if you look at the test trial for the actor memory here, you can see that on the left-hand side, there is the identical video of the same actor performing the same movement. And the distractor event here was a novel actor performing the same movement. So if children remember the event correctly, then they should pick the identical event on the left. For action memory, if you look to the right-hand side of my slide, you can see here in the training event, they saw a man perform an unusual movement, and the target here in the test is the identical video, but the distractor is the same actor performing a different movement. So here, if children remember the action, they should go for the identical event. And what we manipulated in this experiment was the gesture type that the experimenter produced while the children viewed the training events. So this was a between subject manipulation. So for some of the children, the experimenter gestured exclusively in an iconic manner, in which she depicted the manner of motion of the actors in the video with her hands. For some of the children, the experimenter gestured interactively, and these gestures did not depict any aspect of the event and were simply meant to serve as a control and to engage the children in the task. Then for some of the children, the experimenter did not gesture at all, and she just kept her hands in her lap, which was another control group. With our iconic gestures, we also encoded how much of the actors was actually represented by the hand in the iconic gesture. So here on the left-hand side, this movement was really about the toes and the feet. So the hands in the iconic gesture that depicts this movement directly represent the feet and the tiptoeing movement. Then here in the center, When we look at the hand as leg gesture, more of the actor is represented because the hands and the wrists represent the lower half of the actor, as it were, where they represent the legs. And then on the right-hand side here, this gesture, hand as body gesture, it represents the actor's whole body bending at the torso. So here, more of the actor is represented in the iconic gesture than in hand as foot or hand as leg gestures. Now that I've explained the type of task and the experiment design, let me walk you through our predictions. So first of all, because of the way the iconic gestures were designed to highlight how an actor moves, we thought that iconic gestures would boost children's action memory more so than seeing interactive gestures or no gestures, because those gestures didn't depict any part of the action events. Second, we hypothesized that iconic gestures may also boost children's actor memory because part of the actor was still encoded in the iconic gestures. Then third, we thought that because all gestures quite equally highlight the action component in the event, but not all gestures equally highlight the actor, we were hoping that action memory would be boosted more strongly than actor memory. And finally, because of the semiotic type of our iconic gestures, where sometimes they encoded more of the actors than in other occasions, we thought that the more of the actors represented in the iconic gesture, the better children's actor memory would be. So here we thought that hand as body gestures compared to hand as leg gestures and hand as foot gestures would lead to the strongest actor memory. So for the effects of gesture type and memory type on children's recognition memory, the results are as follows. So I've plotted here the proportion of trials that children got correct. So this is out of the 12 trials that they did, how many they got correct in each condition. And on the x-axis here, we have the 3 gesture groups, with iconic gesture group on the left-hand side, interactive in the middle, and no gesture on the right. And the colors in this graph, the darker or blue color represents action memory, and the lighter or yellow color represents actor memory. And the final sample of this study included 72 3-year-olds, and since this was a between subject design, there were 24 children in each group, and all children did both action and actor memory trials. So what we can see here from the graph is the following. So the iconic gesture group always remembered more events than the interactive gesture group and the no gesture group. And where we predicted that there would be an interaction effect where action memory would be boosted more than actor memory, this was actually not the case. It was the case that there was a main effect of gesture type, but both types of memory seem to be equally boosted. So in the next set of hypotheses, we're interested in testing if children do really have better memory of actors if more of the actors is represented in the iconic gesture, which we called semiotic type. So in this analysis, we decided to compare only the iconic gesture group and the no gesture group, because in the no gesture group compared to the interactive gesture group, we're definitely sure that nothing is represented by the hands, not even accidentally, because the experimenter simply did not gesture. Whereas with the interactive gestures, we couldn't be sure. So I do want to add here that the results are exactly the same if we compare iconic and interactive gesture groups. So let me walk you through the graph here. So again, we have children's recognition memory performance in proportions on the y-axis. Then on the x-axis this time, we have the semiotic type, which could be hand as feet, hand as leg, or hand as body gesture. And on the panels, we have action memory and actor memory. And like I said, we only included 2 groups, so there were 48 children in this analysis. what you can see from the left panel is that every gesture type or every semiotic type boosted action memory. So you can see the blue bars or the darker bars are always higher than the yellow bars or the lighter bars. But then interestingly, on the right panel, where we compare actor memory, we can see that hand as feet iconic gestures and hand as legs iconic gestures, they didn't really boost any memory type in particular. However, hand as body gestures, which encoded the full body of the actor, or the whole body, they specifically boosted actor memory compared to no gesture. So the key findings of this study are as follows. First of all, seeing iconic gestures while encoding these complex events facilitated children's memory of the events. And here there was no difference between actor or action memory. Children's memory of the events was just generally boosted by seeing iconic gestures. But when we had a closer look at how actor memory was actually boosted, we found that only those iconic gestures that encoded the whole body of the actor or the whole body movement boosted children's actor memory, whereas hand as feet and hand as legs gestures did not. So we propose several possible mechanisms that can help us explain these findings. And generally, I want to focus here a little bit more on how iconic gestures facilitated children's event memory. And I think that the basic mechanism that underlies these effects is that iconic gestures have the capacity to convey semantic information. So they encode or depict something. And in the case of action memory, which was boosted, I think what's happening there is that iconic gestures schematize complex events, and they create lightweight and easy to store representations. And that's what boosts children's memory. It is really the information that is encoded in the gestures that gets boosted. And this is important because I think when a 3-year-old is watching this event without any guidance, it is a very complex and rich event, and there is a lot going on. And the gesture here is basically communicating or guiding them to the action component. So what is encoded in gesture is encoded in memory. But for actor memory, I think that something different is going on here. And this is quite an interesting finding because I think what this shows is that iconic gestures can guide children's attention to a particular part of an event where important information can be seen. And here, when I produce this whole body gestures, basically encoding the entire actor in my hand gesture, this guides children to the actor and it allows them to potentially pick up more person-specific information like how they wear their hair, what kind of clothes they are wearing, and potentially other person-specific characteristics, which then later help them remember the actor in the test. So here, information that is not directly encoded in gesture help children to perform better in the actor memory trials. And this is interesting because this kind of function of guiding attention is usually only reserved for pointing gestures or didactic gestures and not for iconic gestures. So I think that this study does show to some extent a novel function of iconic gestures, that they can guide children's attention to where important information can be seen. I would like to thank Professor Sotaro Kita, my long-term collaborator and at the time of the study, my PhD supervisor, who has helped me conceive this study and also co-authored the paper, which appeared in Child Development in 2019, if anyone wants to do some further reading. I would also like to thank you for listening. I would be very happy to take any questions or suggestions in the discussion after the symposium. If you'd like to connect with me on my personal social media or the social media of the research group at Warwick, here are the details. And if you are a master's student wanting to do a PhD in developmental psychology and you found this topic particularly interesting, please do get in touch. I do have a fully funded studentship available for a starting date in 2022, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.